ولدت فقيل لها ممن هذا الولد؟ قالت جريج نزل بصومعته. قال جريج أين هذه التي تزعم أن ولدها لي؟ قال يا أبا من أبوك؟ قال راعي الغنم. This hadith is a great hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam given a story of a man that was in the nations that was before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In some hadith, we have this type of stories that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us about good things that happened in the nations that was before the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And usually those people are believers. And this person is a pious person. His name is Jurayj. Once he was praying at Sawma'a. Sawma'a is the place they worship. Then his mother called him, and he was praying. He said, Allahumma ummi wa salati, meaning that, oh Allah, should I keep the salat, keep going in the salat, or should I answer to my mother? Then he keep going in his salat. The same thing she called him. Then he said, Allahumma ummi wa salati, oh my Lord, my salat, should I keep on in my salat or answer my mother? And happened that 3 times. After the 3rd time when she called him and he did not answer, the mother said, Allahumma la yamutu Jurayj hatta turidi hatta yanzura ila wujuh al-mayamis. She prayed against him that before he passed away, she asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make him see the faces of the prostitutes, one of the prostitutes. And he's a pious person, always in his sawma', in his place that he worships. And this is something that he will never like to see the face of the prostitutes. So one day there was a shepherd, a female shepherd. She passed by his sawma', by the place he was worshiping, and then she delivered a baby. She committed zina, she committed adultery, and she delivered a baby. People asked her, who is the father of this baby? And she said, Jurayj, the person who is very pious, and everybody will never expect that a pious person will do something like this. Then Jurayj, he went to that child and he touched them, and then the child, and he was in an age that he cannot speak, in very old age. But that child spoke and said that the ra'i, who is another shepherd, that shepherd man is my father, not Jurayj. This is the general explanation for the hadith, but I'm going deeper in some details in the hadith. The first one is that birrul walidain, being sincere and nice and obedient to our parents, is something obligatory. So if our parents is asking us to do something and we are doing a worship that's not obligatory, so we have to listen to our parents, not to continue on the sunnah worship we are doing. And the ulama says Jurayj, he was not doing obligatory worship. He was doing sunnah worship, the worship that's not obligatory. And in that case, he was supposed to listen to his mother and answer her and go to her and see what she wants. But he kept on in the salat and did not answer his mother. Then his mother prayed against him to see the faces of the prostitutes, and that happened to him. And this shows the importance of birrul walidain, being sincere and nice to our parents. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His glorious book says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Allah decreed that not to worship anyone except Him, and to be sincere and nice to our parents. So there is no end worship, as the scholar says, ذِكْرُ الْخَاصِ بَعْدَ الْعَامِ. Because worship or being nice and sincere to our parents is one of the worships. So Allah mentioned the worship in general, then mentioned a piece of the worship, which is being sincere and nice to the parents. And this shows how important it is, this ibadah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no any spot in the Holy Quran that Allah says, worship me and pray, for example, or worship me and do zakat. We have a lot of verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. But there is no any spot or any verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, worship me and pray or and worship, except being sincere and nice with the parents. Then we're gonna start in the word that the mother of Jurayj made dua against him. So understand that the dua of the parents, whether it's for you or against you, is accepted, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers that dua. So if you are a parent, take advantage of that by praying for your kids, not praying against them. Because unfortunately, this is the problem we have in a lot of parents. When they get angry with their kids, they just pray against them. And you find the child very misguided, and the child does not listen. And the reason why he does not listen and he's in this bad status because of the dua and the prayers that his parents always do against him when he does something bad. So take advantage of this thing, of this blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the parents. Instead of praying against your kids, pray for them. Pray for them. And if you are a kid and you have parents alive, take advantage of that by making your parents praying for you always. Everybody wants to be successful in his life and has a lot of hopes and has a lot of things that wants to happen in his life in the hereafter. So make your parents pray for you. Take advantage of that. Make your parents pray for you. Then we have another hadith narrated in Sahih al-Bukhari, also in Sahih Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam explained about those who spoke in the mahd, the early age that the child cannot speak. That's called al-mahd. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, ثلاثة تكلموا في المهد. 3 people, they spoke in the mahd, in the time that no one can speak because it's too early. Isa alayhi salam, when his mother delivered him, and her people thought that she committed something that's prohibited, Maryam alayhi salam, she pointed at Isa alayhi salam, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فأشارت إليه. She pointed at him. قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا. Then they said, how can you talk to a child that's in the time that he cannot speak? Then Isa alayhi salam spoke, saying, قال إني عبد الله, I'm the slave of Allah, أتاني الكتاب, gave me the book, وجعلني نبيا, and he made me a prophet. This is the first person who spoke in that mahd period, the early age of childhood that the person cannot speak. Isa alayhi salam, then this child that's mentioned in this hadith, and then the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned the third child, and that was a child that was breastfeeding from his mother, and his mother saw a man on his horse. Then he said, Allahumma ja'al ibni mithla hada. Then he prayed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make her son like this person. فأقبل إليه أو فنظر إليه. Then the child who was breastfeeding, then he looked at that man and said, Allahumma la taj'alni mithla. Then another woman passed by and she was a slave person. Then the mother said, Allahumma la taj'al ibni mithla hada. Then the mother said, oh Allah, do not make my son like this person, because she was a slave person. فنظر إليها فقال اللهم اجعلني مثل هذا. فقال أما الأول فجبار من الجبابرة. The first person she saw on the horse like a hero, that was a dictator. He abuses and persecutes people. So that's why the son said, Allahumma do not make me like him. And the second person, the slave lady, كان يقال لها زنت وسرقت ولم تفعل. She was always accused that she committed adultery, zina, and she steals, but she didn't, meaning that she's a pious person. So that's the reason why the child said, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make me like her. So 3 people spoke in that mahd, meaning the early age that the child cannot speak. Then in here, we have to understand something that a lot of people, or there's a lot of opinions about it, or some people deny it, and some people accept it, but they exaggerate in it, which is karamatul awliya. Because what happened to Jurayj, that's karama. Karama means something that's not usual to happen to someone, like miracle that happens to the prophets. We have mu'jizatul anbiya, the miracles that happen to the prophets. Then we have karamatul awliya, things that does not happen in a way that usually happens. It happens to some pious people, karamatul awliya. Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they believe in it as it was, and as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it, and as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam talks about it. Awliya means the wali, the person who shows obedience and pious to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا إِنَّ أَوْلِيَاءَ اللَّهِ لَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Indeed, the awliya of Allah, there is no fear for them, or there is no fear on them, and they do not worry. لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون الذين آمنوا وكانوا يتقون. Those who believe and they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the awliya. And we have a lot of hadith talks about al-awliya. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for example, in hadith recorded in Sahih Muslim says, يقول الله تعالى من عادى لي وليا فقد آذنته بالحرب. من عادى لي وليا فقد آذنته بالحرب. The person who abused, or the person who harmed anybody of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَقَدْ آذَنْتُهُ بِالْحَرْبِ. I'm notifying him that the war for me will be on him, meaning that the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be against him. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَفْضَلُ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. And there is no any worship that my slave does for me, and I like it more than worshiping me in something that's obligatory. And that makes the obligatory worship, the obligatory ibadah, is better than any type of sunnah or nafil ibadah. And sometimes people have some misunderstanding about that, or in practice, people do what's opposite. For example, we notice in Ramadan, people care too much about Salatul Taraweeh, and they come for Salatul Taraweeh every single night, but they don't come for Salatul Dhuhr, they don't come for Salatul Fajr, they don't come for Salatul Asr. But Salatul Asr and Salatul Dhuhr and Salatul Maghrib is more important than Salatul Taraweeh, and get rewarded more than even Salatul Taraweeh. And that does not mean Salatul Taraweeh is not important. It's important. You get rewarded. But first you have to focus, and you have to do the obligatory prayers, the obligatory worship. You get more rewarded than doing the sunnah, the nafil worship. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَفْضَلُ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. There's nothing that my slave does for me as worship, and that's more love to me than worshiping me, something that's obligatory. There's something that's obligatory upon him. ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this hadith Qudsi, explain that how important the nawafil is. ولا يزال عبدي يتقرب إلي بالنوافل حتى أحبه. My slave, when he does nawafil and he gets closer to me by doing nawafil, doing sunnah worships, I love him. فإذا أحببته كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وبصره الذي يبصر به ويده التي يبطش بها وقدمه التي يمشي بها. Then when I love him, I'm going to be his ear that he hears with, and I'm going to be his eyes that he sees with, and I'm going to be his hand that he takes action with, or does action with, and I'm going to be his feet that he walks with. But that does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your ear. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make you successful in hearing whatever is supposed to hear. Hearing something that's going to be good for you and beneficial for you. And that does not mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your eyes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you tawfiq, will give you success to make you look at something that will be beneficial for you. Do something with your hands, and you do something that's beneficial for you. And that benefit you in this life and the hereafter. So we have Karamat al-Awliya in Madhab Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, something that we believe in, but we don't exaggerate. An example for Karamat al-Awliya what happened to Usayd ibn Hudayr and Bashar ibn Abbad, one of the companions. There was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in a very dark night. When they left the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and one of them was having a stick. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a stick of one of them was shiny, has a light, showing them the way and making it clear for them to see and to go back home. And when they separated, one of them was have the light. When they separated, the other one doesn't have light. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make a stick to have a light and to make the darkness very clear for him to go home, because they are pious. The same thing happened with Al-Tufayl ibn Amr al-Dawsi when he came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He was the leader of his people. He believed in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he wanted to go back to his people and to make da'wah for them. Then he asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to pray Allah for him to give him something that will make people believe him that this risala, this deed is true. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prayed for him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ja'ala nuran bayna aynayhi, made a light in between his eyes. فقال يا ربي في غير هذا. He wants it in another spot. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changed the spot of that light to his whip. To his whip. Then he went to his people, and his people believed in him. In another karama that happened to al-awliya, for example, Ashab al-Kahf. They were bothered by the shirk that the people were doing. So they went to the cave, and they slept for 309 years, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. وَلَبِثُوا فِيهِمْ 300 سِنِينَ وَازْدَادُوا تِسْعًا. In usual, no human sleeps like this. They slept for that, and when they come to the same city, they found new people, and all of the people that were living with them, they all died. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them this karama to protect them from the shirk that was taking place in the city they were living in. So this is something that we do believe in it, and it happens to pious people that have a very great position in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That has a great position in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It happens in different ways. Sometimes it happens as to be as guidance for people to believe in them. For example, like Al-Tufayl ibn Amr. And sometimes it's when they in a difficult situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them that and make things that unusual to happen to them, because they are probably so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like what happened with Usayd ibn Hudayr and Bashar ibn Abbad. They were going home, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped them. They were in a hardship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy on them because they are pious people. The Shaykh al-Sa'di says, it's not necessary that for any pious person that karama to happen to him. So if someone who thinks that he is a pious person, but there's no karama happen to him, that does not mean that he's not pious. It's not necessary that any person, a karama has to happen to him. We have a lot of Sahaba that has more belief than Bashar ibn Abbad and Usayd ibn Hudayr. In karama did not happen to them. And they still indeed have more belief than them. But we have to be very careful with this subject, karamatul awliya, because in cities and villages and countries that there is ignorance, some people take advantage of the ignorance of people, and they dominate and control people, claiming that they are awliya for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One thing we have to understand, anyone who's so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never expose that to people saying, I'm pious. That's not a pious person. A pious person will never come to people and say, I'm pious and I'm wali of awliya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he's pious, people will see that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will know it, but people will not see it, and he doesn't care, because he's not doing it for people, so he's doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In some cities, in some countries, we have some people that are sahara, they are magicians, and they doing things that unusual. They do magic, and people think that this is karam, and they claim that they are awliya, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them this because they are pious and they are so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they are so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But because of the ignorance of people in such places, they take advantage of them and they control them. making things that haram halal and making things that halal haram. Making a whole new religion, and people follow them and believe in them. So you have to be careful with that. No pious person will say, I'm pious. If he's pious, people will see that. And he doesn't care if people see or do not see, because he's not doing it for people, doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one thing too, no one knows the unseen and no one knows the future. Such people sometimes, those who are misguided, claiming that they're awliya, they claim that they know the ghaib. What's going to happen is they are magicians, they are sahara. They are sahara, they're dealing with jinns. They're not pious people. So no one knows the unseen and no one knows the future except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not know that. Things that happen in the future, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told about them, but he doesn't know it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him and revealed it to him. Based on that, he's seen it. But beyond that, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam doesn't know anything. Doesn't know the ghaib, the unseen in the future. So no one, if anyone claims that he knows the ghaib, he knows what's going to happen in the future, that's a misguided person, that's a dajjal, that's not a pious person. So you have to be very careful with that. And one of the differences between al-mu'jiza is something that unusual that happened to a prophet to prove his prophecy. And that happened to all the prophets. For example, Isa alayhi salam, he was healing blind people, because usually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mix the mu'jiza with challenge. So during the time of Isa alayhi salam, they were so good in how to say, they were so good in the medical field. They were so good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Isa alayhi salam something that they do not have and they cannot do. Healing a blind person to make them see. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Musa alayhi salam a mu'jiza, a miracle, that he was throwing his stick and the chains to a snake. And he takes out his hand from his pocket and it's become so light, having light in it. And they cannot do that. So it's always it's mixed with challenge to the people that live in that time to do such things. They cannot do it, and that proof that he's a prophet. The same thing with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Arabs, they were so good in words and saying things. The way they speak, the way they arrange words, the way they make the sentences is so beautiful. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Holy Quran to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when they hear it, they admired it, and they never heard something like the Holy Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenged them to do something like the Holy Quran, and they never did it. So al-mu'jiza is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the Prophet, and he exposes it to people, and he challenges people to prove his prophecy. But the karama, if it happens usually, is not to expose it to people and to show off with it. It's not for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that for Ashab al-Kahf, but they did not show up. They did not come out and was telling people this is what happened to us. And Abbad ibn Bishr and Usayd ibn Fudayl, they were not showing up and saying that to people. I'm pious and I'm wali with awliya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So anyone who's claiming that he's wali with awliya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a dajjal person. If you're wali, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it, and people will notice it and see it. And that person should not care about people. They like it, they don't like it. That's not a business he's doing with them. That's something that he does with his Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And anyone who claims that he knows the unseen, he knows al-ghayb, that's a dajjal person, a misguided person. He doesn't know that, because no one knows the unseen except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam does not know al-ghayb, the unseen in the future, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him and told him. So he says such things. So we have to be very careful with this thing, because in some countries you have a lot of people exaggerating in that. They say min awliya, karamatul awliya. That's true. There's karamatul awliya, but not in a way that people will use it to control people and to be. And some of them do not even have ilm shara'i, the knowledge of the religion. And they make themselves awliya. And they make halal haram and haram halal, based on what they like and based on how they want things to go. So these are things that are very important, and things that connected to our belief, to our aqeedah, to our iman. We have to be very careful with it. And If anyone is pious, should conceal that, leave it between him and his Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نكتفي بهذا القدر وصلى اللهم وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه